Chapter 12. Rook stood with his arms folded, boots set wide on the grated deck, eyes fixed on the cluster of screens at the forward console. The air in the analysis bay felt compressed, crowded not just by bodies but by the tension pressing in on everyone present. 6 to 8 hours ago they had drawn up the plan. Now the plan was in motion. A recon drone threading its way down through a maintenance shaft no human had ever set foot in. It was one thing to talk about it in a briefing, another thing entirely to watch it happen. Status update. What have we got on telemetry? Malin didn't look up from the console, her face drawn into pale concentration as the feed jittered across her displays. Signals holding but unstable. Radiation scatter in the shaft walls. Some interference. She flicked a sequence of commands, stabilizing the image into something more coherent. Still inside the upper vent conduit. Depth read, 80 meters. Kel crouched beside her station, wiry frame hunched forward as if he could physically climb into the display. His fingers drummed a staccato rhythm on his thigh, then stilled as the feed gave a sudden flare of static. He muttered a curse, adjusted a dial. Telemetry is bouncing. The angles on this duct weren't meant for sustained relay. He glanced up at Rook, his accent sharper when the stress bled through. We may lose picture if the walls narrow further. We won't lose it, Malin cut in, not taking her eyes off the scrolling diagnostics. I seeded a parallel channel through the tether line. Worst case we get grainy stills until the drone emerges. Caro shifted his weight behind them, arms crossed to mirror Rook's without meaning to. His jaw flexed but he stayed silent. Around the perimeter, 2 Marines leaned against bulkheads, rifles slung but hands close. Their helmets were clipped to their belts, sweat streaking their temples even though the room was cool. Everyone was watching the feed. Everyone understood the risk even if no one said it aloud. The screen cleared. Narrow walls came into focus, the camera catching the rough geometry of the vent's interior. The shaft was a tight crawl space, reinforced by dull alloy ribs, their edges dusted with particulate that glittered when the drone's forward lights passed over them. Every few meters a junction seam cut across, sealed and welded. The drone's optical lens twitched left, right, then forward again. Static hissed through the speakers. Kel's hands flew across the controls, recalibrating, interference spiking again. Keep it together, Rook said quietly. His tone was flat, but it carried enough weight that the Marine nearest the hatch straightened unconsciously. I want a clear feed when we hit the next junction. Malin's shoulders tightened, but she didn't bristle. She knew the stakes as well as he did. We'll have it. Seconds stretched. The hum of the drone's thrusters pulsed faintly through the speakers, a sound that was less heard than felt in the chest. Rook's gaze flicked to the clock inset on the lower screen. 8 minutes since insertion. Too early for conclusions, too long for comfort. Caro leaned in, voice pitched low. Reminds me of drift cam ops in the Sheridan belt. Half the time you lost signal to background noise. The other half you found something you wished you hadn't. Rook gave a faint grunt that might have been agreement, might have been dismissal. Let's hope this falls in the middle. One of the Marines exhaled sharply, then caught himself. The bay fell back into silence. The image jolted suddenly. A smear of static slashed diagonally across the feed, replaced an instant later by a clearer view. The shaft bent at an angle, walls constricting tight enough that the drone's casing scraped as it pushed through. The sound carried back as a muted screech, like teeth across glass. Careful, Kel muttered. His hands hovered as though he might reach through the console. Another 6 centimeters clearance and we'd jam. The drone righted, continued forward. The feed stuttered again, then steadied. Beyond the narrow throat, the shaft widened. A soft glow washed across the frame, faint but unmistakable. Contact, Malin said. Her voice was steady, but her throat moved once as she swallowed. I'm reading open space ahead. Radiation levels dropping, EM interference stabilizing. Bring it through, Rook ordered. The drone advanced. For a heartbeat, the screen was chaos. Signal struggling to adjust to the sudden spatial change. Then the image resolved. The shaft opened into a wider duct, metallic walls lined with conduits trailing away into dark. Dust motes drifted in the air, caught by the drone's light and suspended like stars in miniature. Every person in the room leaned closer. The Marine near the hatch muttered under his breath, too low to make out. Telemetry holding, Kel confirmed, voice hushed. Signal is clean. That's... He broke off, shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe it. That's a duct built to move more than air. Malin keyed a magnification, overlaying schematics onto the feed. The conduits branched at intervals, each marked with faint company standard etchings, but the metalwork was heavier, layered, out of alignment with known construction. "Not on any record I've seen," she said. Caro's arms folded tighter across his chest. "Hidden retrofit. Somebody built this to last." The drone's camera panned slowly, capturing every angle. The hum of the thrusters was steady now, background noise against the brittle silence in the bay. Rook's eyes narrowed, scanning the image as if he could force it to give up answers. "Depth?" he asked. Malin checked the readout, 230 meters down. Shaft gradient is shallow but consistent. If this duct keeps widening, it may intersect a larger chamber. Rook's jaw flexed once. He didn't reply immediately, only stared at the feed as the drone drifted forward again. The duct stretched into shadow. The drone's lights probed the dark, revealing only more conduits, more dust, more silence. It felt endless. The tension in the room wound tighter with each meter. Kel broke it with a low mutter. "Feels like we're the first ones down here in decades." "Or the first ones allowed to look," Caro countered, his voice flat. Rook didn't speak. His gaze was locked on the feed, one hand tightening on his opposite wrist behind his back. He had led away missions into collapsed mines, into derelict stations, into places where silence pressed in thicker than air. But this silence had a shape. It pressed from the screen, filled the bay, wormed into his chest. "Continue the descent," he ordered. The drone's lights swung forward again, cutting into the dark. The shaft bent once more, wider this time, the walls curving in a way that suggested deliberate redirection rather than structural accident. Malin's display chirped. "We're approaching a junction. Radiation tapering further. Readings are anomalous." "Define anomalous," Rook said. Her eyes flicked across the data, then to him. "This section is live. Power cycling at minimal levels. Pressure regulation intact. Not dormant." Caro's head lifted sharply. One of the Marines swore under his breath. Rook's face gave nothing away. "Keep it moving." The drone drifted onward, lights probing further down. The shaft walls thickened, plating overlaid with unfamiliar welds that Malin couldn't trace to any company standard. Static crept back into the feed, jittering across the image until Kel killed 2 redundant filters and forced a cleaner signal through. "Depth 400 meters, Malin reported. "Power fluctuations ahead, minimal but consistent." Rook leaned closer. "Source?" She shook her head. "Not local bleed. Cycling, like pressure regulation. Intermittent." The duct widened gradually, ribs giving way to smoother alloy. Conduits multiplied along the walls, thicker bundles trailing into shadow. Dust streamed in sheets when the drone's lights brushed over them, disturbed after decades of stillness. 600 meters, Kel murmured. His voice was tight, reading faint heat differentials in the wall junctions. Malin adjusted the feed, overlays sparking alive. Colored lines bled across the display, sketching traces of energy flow. "We're close to something active, subcircuitry still breathing." By 700 meters, the duct felt less like a shaft and more like an artery, broad enough the drone no longer scraped the walls. The hum of its drive filled the bay like a heartbeat. 748, Malin said, voice almost a whisper. "Signal stabilizing. Reading spiking ahead." The static thickened once more, the picture struggling. Shadows gave way to hints of structure, the suggestion of open space. Rook's hand curled into a fist behind his back. "Hold it steady!" The feed fuzzed, flickered, then froze on the edge of revelation. The containment bay was kept colder than any other section of the ledge. The walls sweated condensation where the circulation failed to keep up, droplets running into the grates below. Overhead, strips of white light hummed with a faint flicker, their glow dulled by the Faraday mesh stretched across the entire chamber. It was a room designed to smother heat, signal, motion, anything that might bleed outward or inward. Technician Valen adjusted the seals on his suit, tugged the wrist cinches tighter until the gloves bit into his skin. He hated working in here. The silence pressed against his ears until even his own breathing felt too loud, and the air tasted faintly metallic despite the filters. Still, orders were orders. The spearform had to be prepped for transfer. He keyed the lock. The inner door slid open with a sluggish groan, heavy composite plates parting to reveal the inner cage. At its center hovered the object. The spearform looked inert, a black geometry suspended in the restraint field, matte panels absorbing the light without reflection. Veins curved out at angles that suggested both weapon and wing, sensor ridges tracing its underside in a pattern his mind wanted to interpret as deliberate. It had been floating there since the capture, motionless, as though asleep. And yet Valen had never been able to shake the feeling that it was not merely present but waiting. He stepped inside, boot heels clanging on the grated floor. The airlock closed behind him with a resonant boom, cutting him off from the technicians outside. For a moment he stood still, helmet angled toward the drone. The hum of the containment field filled the chamber, a low vibration in his bones. "Right," he muttered under his breath. "Let's get this done." He moved to the first stabilizer mount. Heavy magnetic clamps secured the drone to the cradle frame, redundancies layered over redundancies. He entered the code sequence on his wrist pad. The clamp lights dimmed, releasing with a hiss of escaping pressure. The spear form didn't shift, held steady in its restraint field, but Valen swore the hum pitched upward by a fraction. He frowned, waited for the reading to normalize, then crouched to check the secondary locks. His hands moved automatically. He'd done this procedure dozens of times on company hardware, but this wasn't company hardware. Every latch, every adjustment felt alien beneath his gloves, as though the machine resented being handled. The second stabilizer disengaged with a thunk. He straightened, sweat beading along his brow despite the cool. His vision swam for half a second, a wave of dizziness forcing him to catch himself on the rail. "Shit," he whispered. He blinked rapidly, waiting for the spinning to subside. The containment hum pressed harder in his skull. He told himself it was just the air. Thin, recycled, heavy with ion scrubbers. It had to be. One more stabilizer. He keyed the final sequence. The cradle arms retracted, folding into locked transport position. The drone now hung entirely within its restraint field, tethered only by invisible energy rather than physical clamps. It looked freer, somehow, as though it had been waiting for this. Valen licked dry lips. "You're not going anywhere," he told it. He initiated the cradle's transport lock, magnetic struts lowering into position around the field generator. The harness sealed with a hollow click. On the panel, the status lights shifted from amber to green. "Transfer ready." He allowed himself a breath of relief. His head still throbbed faintly, a pulsing ache behind his eyes, but the job was done. He turned toward the exit, boots ringing on the grating. The hum deepened suddenly, just for a moment. It was so faint he might have imagined it. A resonance that shivered across his ribs. His vision fuzzed again just for a heartbeat, and then cleared. He quickened his pace, cycled the door, and stepped into the outer lock. The hiss of repressurization filled the space. He pulled off his helmet, eager for cleaner air. It was only when the outer door opened and he stepped back into the corridor that someone spoke. "Valen." He turned, startled. A young systems tech leaned against the console, eyes narrowing. "Hey, you're bleeding." Valen frowned. "What?" The tech gestured to his face. Valen raised a hand, touched the skin under his nose. His fingers came away smeared red. A slow trickle was running down from his nostril, warm against the cold air. "I didn't even—" He grabbed a cloth from the desk, pressed it to his face. The bleeding wasn't heavy, just insistent. A pressure release. He glanced back at the sealed inner cage. The spear form hung motionless within its field, as inert as it had ever been. But he couldn't shake the feeling it had done something. "You all right?" the tech asked, uncertain. "Yeah," Valen said quickly. He forced a thin smile, though his stomach nodded. "Just a pressure shift. Happens." The tech didn't look convinced. Neither was he. Behind the mesh, the alien drone hovered silently, but to Valen it seemed to radiate awareness, as though it had listened to every motion, every breath, and marked him for having come too close. He wiped his glove again. More blood. Just a smear, but enough to remind him that whatever this thing was, it didn't want to be moved. And yet tomorrow, or sooner, it would be. They didn't speak at first, not even to note the way the static crawled across the image like frost. The drone held at 750 meters, thrusters whispering, lights probing down a mouth that seemed to widen as if it sensed the approach. The shaft had grown broader, no longer a squeeze tube with metal ribs, but a coursing artery with smooth alloy lining and threaded cable runs fused behind sealed panels. Dust streamed away in sheets when the drone's lamp beam cut through, then settled again as though the place were trying to hide itself. "Signal stable," Kel said, coaxing the noise floor down with a feathering touch. "If we keep to this angle, we should avoid the tight bends we saw earlier." "Depth?" Rook asked. 782, Malin replied. "Pressure differential still nominal, low cycle air. Power signatures increasing by a fraction. There's something drawing current ahead. Regular cadence, not random bleed." Rook's arms were folded behind his back, one hand locked around the opposite wrist. He kept his voice even. "Advance, but slowly." Kel nudged the stick. The drone ghosted forward, camera yawning left and right before returning to center. The shaft dipped gently, then rose, the gradient so slight it felt intentional. More conduits appeared in the periphery, bundles thickening then vanishing behind armored plates. The plating seams were too clean for the original colony spec, too precise. Somebody had added this later, built it to last, and then buried it under silence. 800, Malin said softly. EM interference is smoothing out. That's odd, actually. The deeper we go, the cleaner the field. Containment, Caro murmured from behind them. If you want to move signal cleanly inside, you isolate it from outside noise. Rook didn't glance back. Don't theorize ahead of the data. Keep your eyes on the feed. The drone drifted forward. A faint chime burrowed through the comm speakers as Kel locked a range gate. Lines of tiny numerics trembled across Malin's secondary pane. Temperature variations so slight they looked like instrument drift, but they held steady when she removed a smoothing filter. Localized thermal differences at junctions, she said. We saw that around 600. It's stronger here. Thermal load at panel corners. Either residual heat sinks or something alive behind the wall. A Marine near the hatch. Varga, sweat beading on the shaved curve of his skull, shifted his weight and wiped his palms on his thighs. Alive like machines cycling, Malin said. Not like animals. That's better, Varga muttered, not sounding wholly convinced. 840, Kel said. Tell me if you see anything weird with the harmonic trace. I'm getting a whisper above the drive hum. Rook heard it now that Kel pointed it out. A color note just at the edge of perception, like a glass tuned under someone's finger. He didn't like it. He filed the sensation away and made his voice flatter. If the trace spikes, freeze and hold. The shaft widened further. The drone's lights reached out and didn't hit the other side for a beat that felt too long, then came back with the impression of vastness, of space opening. Static fuzzed the image and Kel trimmed it back, hands moving without wasted motion. 912, Malin said. Power cadence changed. Listen. She piped the readout's sound profile to a low channel. A heartbeat thump, soft and even, underscored the drone's own whisper. Pressure regulation slow cycle. You're certain? Rook asked. I'm certain of the signature. It's pressure reg. This section's still keeping an atmosphere. Rook let that sit in the room, a facility almost a kilometer down, still breathing by itself. Someone had sealed it and walked away, and it had continued to do its job without anyone watching. Advance, he said. The drone slid over the lip of the widened duct and into an open shaft lobe. The walls fell back another meter. The floor, if it could be called that, dipped and then leveled. Kel slowed everything down, letting the camera settle before yawing. The beam caught a vertical cable run disappearing into a closed grill. Dust covered it like a blanket. In the interstices where the dust hadn't settled, the metal showed unmarked, as if new. 950, Malin breathed. Signal attenuation minimal. That hum is still there, but it's almost helpful, like a guide track. Don't anthropomorphize the noise, Rook said, though the same thought had tried to sneak through the disciplined part of his mind. He watched for shapes that meant doors, for geometrics that meant a change from maintenance conduits to something meant to be occupied. Hold, Kel said suddenly. I'm seeing a brightness bleed ahead. Could be another void. He froze the drone and ticked the focus twice. The feed sharpened across a gray wash of air and then fixed on open space. Not a corridor. Wider, higher, the scale felt different. The lamp cone reached out and revealed a cutaway mouth beyond, a threshold into a chamber. Range to boundary? Rook asked. 6 meters, Kel said. We go slow. They went slow. The drone nosed forward, lights flaring on dust, then drawing a high rectangle in the dark. A lip of darker material framed the opening. The air inside didn't move at all. The dust hung like silt in a lake. Kel trimmed thrust, let the drone's forward momentum carry it across the threshold, centimeters at a time. The image rolled into a vast underground habitat. It was like stepping into a sealed cathedral. The drone's light reached and couldn't catch the far wall all at once. It came back piecemeal. The glint of a catwalk, the edge of a mezzanine, a bank of dead consoles, a glassed-off lab set on the second tier. Everything wore a coat of dust. Even the parts that shone had a veil over them, a softening. Chairs stood at angles. A cup sat on a console with a film over its rim. Nothing had moved in a long time, and yet the power in the walls made the place feel awake in a way the dead never are. No one in the bay spoke. Rook felt their silence as pressure, as if the entire room had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. Lights are on, Malin said, as if the words had to be spoken for the brain to accept them. Not full load. Indicators, strips, legibility bars. That's deliberate low draw. Kel sent the drone up a meter, then slid sideways. The camera panned over workstations in orderly islands, all facing out toward a central void, as if their operators had been meant to watch something. Dust lay thick, disturbed only by the pressure wake of the drone. Tendrils lifted and fell in lazy spirals. On one bank of screens, a faint glow persisted. Standby. On another, a line of small indicators still blinked at a patient interval. "Hold!" Malin said sharply. "Wait, that's an alert. What's that buoy marker?" Kel braked the drone. "Where?" "Right there, secondary screen, upper right quadrant." She magnified. The image pixelated and then resolved into a simple, brutalist glyph. A circle broken by a crescent notch, bracketed by 3 vertical ticks. Beneath it, a string of numerals ticked, stopped, ticked again. Regular pulses punctuated by a longer hold. Next to the glyph, a shallow bar graph drove upward and then slipped back down at steady intervals. "What am I looking at?" Varga asked, leaning over Malin's shoulder, forgetting rank for a moment. "Deep space telemetry," Malin said slowly. "It's labeled as a buoy, like a sentinel pylon. The symbol's not one of ours." She glanced at Caro. "How old were your recon buoys in this sector?" Caro's brow furrowed. "We never put a buoy in this system. Company never admitted to any anyway." "One's talking to this screen," Kel said. "Or something calling itself a buoy." His fingers moved. He slowed the feed to frame by frame and stepped through the last 10 seconds again, watching the tick pulse on the numeric string. Pulses are baseline spaced with a long interval. Could be distance lag. Could be a trigger chain. "Don't guess," Rook said. But he couldn't stop his mind from assembling the shape of a warning. A distant thing moving, telling a buried thing to wake. He pressed his hands harder into the small of his back and made his voice level. "Map this room. Prioritize structural exits." Kel nodded once and slewed the camera. The drone drifted across the central open space, past a dangling walkway where 2 cable ties had failed, and left a length of conduit to swing and then freeze in suspension. The beam found a wall emblazoned with a faded hazard band. Yellow-black striping dulled to the color of old bread. Under the band, stamped in clean company type, a line of text ran the length of the panel. "Hold it," Kel said. "Back half a meter." The drone eased back. Malin zoomed and cleaned the contrast. Words resolved out of the dust film. "Emergency evacuation. Access point." The last 2 words were duplicated beneath in small, crisp print. "Vector E3 surface." Kel let out a low whistle. There we go. Caro's posture changed. He stepped closer to the screen, eyes fixed on the words as if proximity would stamp them into muscle memory. "Follow it." Rook didn't disagree. "Do it. Slow." They traced the hazard band leftward. Every few meters a small arrow icon pointed the way. The band bent 90 degrees, ran along a gantry row, then down a flight of graded stairs to a door. The door's seal light glowed a steady, patient green. The drone eased around it. Just to the right, a painted stair icon marked an incline beyond. "There," Malin said, unnecessary. "Stair vector." Kel sent the drone that way. The camera found a cut upward at a steady angle, narrower than the chamber but much wider than the initial shaft. The stair wasn't a decorative spiral. It was industrial. A long, straight run with relief platforms every 20 meters. Walls smooth and reinforced. Railings fused directly out of the alloy. Dust hung on the risers like fur. "Angle?" Rook asked. "Grade at 3%, Malin said, eyeing the overlay. "That's gentle. Designed for moving equipment on sleds, not just bodies." Kel switched on the drone's lidar and let it make a quick scan. A wireframe sketched across Malin's secondary pane. Lines for the walls, rough voxel clusters for gaps. He seeded a breadcrumb trail and started the climb, slow and steady, letting the drone hold hands with the geometry. With each rise, the telemetry refined the model. "Depth 986, Malin said against the hush. "Climbing." The stair kept going. The drone's lights washed a soft gradient up the next run and the next. Relief platforms appeared and vanished around the camera's yaw. The hum of the drone's drive sounded like a heartbeat laid over the pressure reg thump, turning the bay into a body where 2 hearts beat in counterpoint. "Vector heading?" Rook asked quietly. He didn't look away from the feed. Kel brought up a compass rose overlay and tied its orientation to the ledge's surface grid. "If you trust the gyro after that corkscrew at 600, he said. "We're angling northeast." Malin mashed the scan into a generalized subsurface model and overlaid a translucent terrain map of their landing sector. A red line unspooled from the drone's current position in the habitat chamber, climbing at 3%, angling into the map like a needle. The line touched the surface layer 5.2 miles from their current surface base, just over a low ridge system. A flashing circle marked the estimated exit point. 5 miles, Malin said. 8.3 kilometers, give or take. Caro's answer came at once, the reflex of a man already building a plan. We can put a shuttle down out there. Varga glanced at Ilian, the other Marine, then back at the screen. If it's sealed, we'll need charges, and not a lot of room to fall back if the blow kicks back down the stair. We won't be blowing the stair, Malin said sharply. If you overpressurize, you could collapse the entire vector. We'll look for a cap seam or a lock. If it was built to evacuate, it was built to open. Assuming whoever sealed it didn't weld the door from the outside, Ilian said. Assuming we don't announce ourselves to whatever those buoy glyphs are talking to, Kel added. You plant a charge in the wrong place. Every sensor still listening down here hears it. Rook let the crosstalk run long enough to surface the edges of their fear. Then he raised a hand and the room came back to him. We're not committed to anything yet. Options only. He nodded at the screen. Kel, keep climbing. Put eyes on whatever terminus we can reach without risking loss of signal. Malin, build me a corridor width estimate at the projected exit and a charge model for worst-case breach if the lock's dead. Caro, talk to your pilot about terrain at those coordinates. I want wind, dust shear, field stability. If we drop a shuttle out there, it lands once and it lifts clean. No heroic set-downs on the second try. Copy, Caro said, already working the math in his head. Varga cleared his throat. Sir, if we open that door and the place lights up... We close it, Rook said. Fast! And we'll have a local comms line only. Nothing that reaches company relay unless I say it goes. Understood? Understood. The drone climbed, step after step, platform after platform, the flight numbers ticking by in Malin's overlay. At each landing, Kel paused, slewed the camera, and pinged the walls. At each pause, the pressure reg thump maintained its calm cadence, as if the facility itself refused to hurry. 10:20, Malin said. We're past a kilometer measured along the shaft line. Vertical delta is less, but the path length is there. Any changes in the hum? Rook asked. Kel tilted his head, listening as if to music. It's thicker, or I'm imagining it. There's a new modulation around the edges of the drive whine, like we're picking up a sympathetic frequency from further up. Translate that to not metaphor, Caro said dryly. Something's ahead making the air vibrate differently, Kel said. Then, almost reluctantly, or something reacting to us. No one answered that. The drone continued. Dust streamed off risers in slow drifts, forever falling and never hitting the ground in their view. Hold, Malin said. Spiking, power draw ahead. Something just cycled. The cadence changed. Kel froze the drone in midair. The feed shimmered and then steadied, freezing the beam of the lights against an anonymous patch of alloy wall that looked like every other stretch of alloy wall they had seen for the last 5 minutes. Where? Rook asked. He could feel his pulse but kept his tone even. A path, Malin said. 70 meters. A valve or a lock. The draw was brief, then settled. I can't tell if it was internal maintenance or a response. Kel lowered the drone by half a tread so the lamp angle changed. Shadows rearranged themselves in very small ways. On the far lip of the next landing, the beam picked up the barest hint of a seam in the dust, a line that didn't belong to the brush of the drone's wash. There, Kel said softly. Door edge. Rook took a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. How's our signal margin? Good, Kel said, though he didn't sound sure. This is still within our attenuation budget. If we creep up, we'll keep picture. Creep, Rook said. No heroics. Hold 10 meters off. I want a full look before we commit to a route. The drone tipped forward, a quiet creature sniffing at the edge of a burrow. The lamp slid over the next rise. The seam resolved into double joints, a cap assembly hidden beneath decades of fine particulate. Beyond it, the stair continued its patient climb into whatever the builders had chosen as an exit. The hum in the bay felt thicker now, as if the speakers carried not only sound but the presence of their own breath. Varga shifted again, the fabric of his knee guard whispering. Sir, you want us to start prepping breaching kit now, or wait on seeing the cap? Rook weighed the question for exactly the second it deserved. Prep it, he said, but you don't arm anything until I've seen that lock. And if there's no lock? Caro asked. Then we decide if we leave it alone, Rook said, eyes never leaving the feed. Or if we put a hole in something we don't understand. No one had an answer for that either. The only voice that spoke was the drone's hum and the patient thump of a machine 1,000 meters down that refused to admit it had been abandoned. "Advance," Rook said, very softly, as the drone's lights skimmed the first clean line of metal at the cap, and something, pressure, power, presence, shifted just out of frame. The shuttle's lights were down to a sleep-state wash, enough to sketch the edges of the berth and the closet seam and the low shelf under the mirror. The hum had settled into the narrow band the engineers called acceptable. Not the first-day rasp when the core wanted to buck. Not the dangerous purr that meant the coils were overeager. Sand surfaced into that hum as if it were a tide she had memorized long ago. She lay still for a few breaths, letting the rhythm climb the ribs and fall again, and only when the pattern matched the predicted curve did she open her eyes. Just as her eyes opened, a soft vibration in the pocket screen on the shelf broke the room's perfect repetition. She pushed herself up on an elbow and watched the device kiss the edge of the ambient light. The notification light did not blink. It pulsed once, long like a throat clearing. "Directorate flash." She took the device and let it read her. The encryption handshake ran silent. Heat in her glove, a matched pattern in the bones of her wrist. She did not think about the strangeness of feeling a message greet the skeleton. She did not think about the taste of copper the first time she'd learned the handshake, years ago, when nothing in her body had yet admitted what it was. The message resolved cold. Text burned into the dark. "VCS Purity deployed. ETA Vestan reach 6 days." She didn't move. The shuttle's hum reasserted itself in the pause, filling the berth with an impression of distance measured as pressure. San read the message again, not with her eyes but with the part of her that archived, compared, indexed. Purity, a name the directors gave to ships when they wanted the officers to forget what steel and vacuum and fire did to the people inside them. She had seen the registry files. She had seen the hull when the ship was still a skeleton under floodlights, and she had watched men walk its spine and say it would be a deterrent. They always said that first. It made the second sentence easier to swallow. 6 days. Purity's timeline meant more than one thing at once. It meant the directors had decided on the optics of decisiveness. It meant the Black Tier crew had been sitting in their bunks waiting for a wake signal. It meant the company wanted control of the narrative when the dust cleared. It also meant that if she failed to place the words in the right order in the right ears at the right moment, they would clean the ledger by removing variables. Variables had names. Rook. Carol. The ledge. Hers. She set the device on the shelf and keyed the berth's privacy seal. The sound it made was soft, more suggestion than lock. No one came into her room uninvited on a prototype run. Still, rituals anchored you. She crossed to the small locker recessed by the bulkhead and opened it on the narrow cradle that held the harmonics case. The wafers nested there like coins that had forgotten kings. She did not touch them. She didn't need to. The patterns they held were etched in a place closer than bone. 6 days, she said aloud, because sometimes you had to place sound into air to give it a weight that thought could not. Purity would run on its own humors. A different kind of engine, a different bass note. She imagined the men on its deck watching their own clocks, chalking their fingers, drilling in corridors that smelled of solvent and fear. She imagined the director on the end of the flash writing the same sentence to 3 different people and hoping each of them would read a different meaning into it. She reached out and turned the device face down on the shelf. The pulse of its lock light paused, then went dark. Her hand stayed there a moment longer than needed, palm flat on the smooth casing, as if the pressure could alter the content. It could not. She returned to the couch, sat, and let the mesh bite her shoulders in 2 small points that the body would remember and obey. The hum found her again, steady as tide. She stayed with it until breath matched sound, until thought narrowed into the kind of line you can walk without looking down. 6 days had a shape to it. So did inevitability. She did not pretend they were different shapes. She closed her eyes and listened to the ship count them for her.